The weight felt eternal. The two Marines never took off their helmets, but they fidgeted every now and again, cracked a joint, or took a moment to rest, but they never once took their eyes off him. During his time in the academy, he interacted very little with anyone that didn't belong to his course. After he graduated and went to assist the mandatory patrol rotations, his already limited interaction with the engineering corps, the Marines, the auxilia, and every other branch aside from the mechanics, maintenance staff, and general crew went up in smoke. He knew, of course, that no commoner could become a Marine, that a prestigious role reserved for nobles only. The training, equipment, implants, and conditioning each Marine required needed to be a solid investment. Comparing them to the unwavering discipline of the Royal Marines seems unfair. Maybe I've been misled by setting my expectations too high. Any of them could still beat me to a pulp if they wanted to, let alone two. So they're not weak nor defenseless. To know that there are traitor Marines among our ranks is greatly concerning. Who could command such power and authority to not only mobilize Marines, but keep this secret room, probably several more, in the exalted virtue concealed for who knows how long? Wyatt thought deeply as he remained as calm and unmoving as possible. He was too tense to allow himself a moment of laxity, but at the same time, he did his best to give off the appearance that he was a mere simpleton. Meanwhile, internally, he was trying to deduce who could be the possible traitor and how high that traitor sat. Think, Wyatt. Who could have enough pull to warrant the use of a QEC in such a manner? The traitor practically gave out their best tool for nearly nothing. So either they have another QEC hidden somewhere, which would be disastrous, or they have other means to convey information to the Duke's side, he thought deeply, glancing between his guards several times. Or perhaps Cynthia and Juliana were right, and this is nothing more than a tactic to hide. Sacrificing a commoner with a petty trial, forcing the eyes of the hunters to look elsewhere long enough to remain in the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike. Anyone ranked lieutenant or lower was immediately ruled out in his mind, including, of course, every non-commissioned Navy rank. A lieutenant commodore could have some power, but only within a limited group, if that. Wyatt didn't know if there were any commodores in the fleet, but while their reach could be greater, he doubted they had any significant influence outside a single ship. And no commodore could command a vessel larger than a destroyer-class vessel. A lieutenant commander would have more influence. Abacus Reed was a lieutenant commander, but he wasn't popular or influential, so his rank was for show only. Would other lieutenant commanders be similar? Does it even matter? If I recall correctly, they have more influence than a lieutenant commodore, but less so than a commodore. He sighed heavily, making the two Marines guarding him tighten their grip on their weapons for a moment. I should have paid more attention to the commanding structure back at the academy. No use in crying over a crushed Lakoa now, I suppose. Left without much else to do, Wyatt swallowed his annoyance and continued to ponder away, futile effort as it was. Perhaps a captain is responsible. They can command up to heavy cruisers and battle cruisers, and a noble would either need to have done pretty amazing deeds or belong to a powerful house to achieve that rank. But could a captain have the means to orchestrate something like this? Wyatt thought, and internally groaned when he realized something to add to his already mounting frustration. They're nobles. How could I forget that? A military or navy rank may give me some direction, but that means little compared to what house the traitor belongs. Political impact, influence, wealth, power. Clara and Redford mentioned that the puppets were many, but the puppet master could be anyone. But who? The one standing at the top, the head of the Viper, has to be someone powerful from a prominent house and likely holds a significant rank within the fleet, and must be aboard the exalted virtue, he reasoned, his head threatening him with a headache. That left only a few possible culprits, but all he could do was speculate. He wasn't a detective or an investigator. Most of his conclusions came from observation and logical outcomes. But in the world and the convoluted web that was nobility, he had no leverage. Hence why he was a living tactical mine, ready to explode in the face of the traitor. But who was the traitor? He didn't know the other commanders all that much except for what he was told of them. They all came from significant and powerful houses, and thus could easily have the means and connections to orchestrate a possible mutiny or act as the eyes of Duke Draymore aboard the Prince's fleet. Redford Kalin was obviously not the traitor. The trust he received from Clara and the Winfield sisters had been more than evident. Juliana, being a Winfield, was also discarded, which also worried him since the two Marines belonged to her division, and here they were, traitors working under their noses. How many more were like them? How many other commoners and low-ranking nobles were actual traitors? The more I think about it, the worse it gets, he thought with grim resolution. Redford insisted that Lukacs Ishtal, George Lintar, and Vivian Taravis were loyal, and he'd trust his commander's judgment, but he still had his doubts about George Lintar. If there ever was a noble that represented all the idiocy and vain glory, chest-puffing, feather-preening attitude that nobility was infamous for, it had to be him. Could a man as deeply rooted in the machinations of nobility and the disdain for commoners truly be loyal to anyone but himself? He doubted it. Admiral Damien Valto was a mystery to him. He'd seen him twice, and that didn't give him many indications of anything. But according to Juliana, he was the reason the prince and their forces managed to escape. He was a rigid man, the sort that does things by the book, and never deviated from his orders, but one who was loyal and could be trusted. That leaves Frederick Anderson, Hannah Talleyrand, and William Hempstroke as the possible puppet master. But were any of them truly responsible? Or was there an unseen actor behind all of it? Hannah Talleyrand commanded the smallest division since there were roughly 200 troops under her charge, and filled the gap to give a provisional command to the auxilia forces. William Hempstroke was another noble that he particularly had a displeasure towards, but nothing more than that. He was a ground and assault commander, and his reach was limited. Finally, Frederick Anderson was also a fundamentalist, just like William and George, though he seemed capable of restraining himself for the sake of performing his duty. "This is futile," Wyatt concluded. "No matter how many times I circle the subject, I can't suspect anyone without personal bias. Not to mention, I don't know any of them enough to draw any conclusions. Nobles are petty, self-serving, egotistical, manipulative assholes as a general rule, but I can't point any fingers blindly. Clara was right. In this battlefield, I'm blind. I can't rely on any expectations now that I'm inside the kill zone. All I can do is—" His line of thought was interrupted when he heard several footsteps approaching. He focused on the arriving shadows as they slowly took form, revealing 3 people wearing armor, but without insignias or identification badges, so he couldn't tell what branch they belonged to. But the one in the middle was different from the rest. The way he walked and carried himself told he thought highly of himself, a true and proper blue blood. The noble sat across the table and leaned forth, resting his head on his entwined fingers. "That was quite the declaration you made during your mockery of a trial, Wyatt Staples." Wyatt frowned internally as the voice lacked intonation and sounded garbled. Is he using a voice scrambler? He's not taking any chances, and I doubt he's the mastermind, the pilot thought for a second, then tilted his head slightly. "And you are?" "My name is of no importance at the current moment, Wyatt Staples. What is important is what you can do," he began. "What you did requires bravery and guts. You have both, despite being a commoner. To stand up against royalty to make such a declaration? Impressive. Most impressive. We honestly thought you were just a mindless lapdog to the Astorian rats." Wyatt chuckled. "At least it seems we agree on that. Blue blood." He spat back. "Royals are just fancier nobles. Whatever you want from me, you can go to hell. I'm done serving the selfish, ungrateful nobles who don't appreciate risking my life for their petty squabbles." The other 4 men present made a move, but stopped when their leader uttered a single command. "Stop!" he said, and waited for several silent moments. "You are not like other commoners, Wyatt Staples. We've seen that you can throw away the collar around your neck, and perhaps you can serve a worthy purpose. A purpose that goes beyond just serving an ancient, stagnant house that doesn't acknowledge your efforts outside empty words and a meaningless promotion." He sounds just like Mr. Warlow during his rants, Wyatt thought dryly before replying. "I really thought that saving a member of House Astor would give me something, anything at all. I'm just a commoner. I should have known that his royal bastard would have made me serve him instead." "Such a deed should have been rewarded with a completed military service record and a hefty sum in credits," the man agreed. "Commoner or not, you deserved at the very least that. The means to live a life without financial struggles at the very least. It is truly shameful that instead of rewarding their loyal subjects, they tighten the yoke. Loyalty is its own reward, as if. If that was the case, there wouldn't be pirates, smugglers, or rebel groups, Wyatt stated flatly as a smirk adorned his lips and he threw his hands up. They sure like to abuse that line but hate to put it in practice themselves. The man nodded. Precisely, Wyatt Staples. It seems that you're far more intelligent and perceptive than most commoners. A talented pilot, too. I can understand why that bitch wanted to keep you as a pet. Quite ungrateful, eh? You save her life, and as thanks you get a collar and a leash. Your skills are truly wasted in the service of House Astor. Wyatt felt a fire form in his stomach the moment he insulted Clara so brazenly. The quips and diplomatic approach that Uriel Hoax had used were brimming with respect in comparison to the treacherous scumbag sitting in front of him. But he had a role to play, and he couldn't allow his true feelings to surface. Instead, his smirk turned into a smile. Precisely! That holier-than-thou wretch never thanked me, not sincerely at least. To her I was just doing my duty. Thus, she owed me nothing. So you've seen the corruption within House Astor, and you know the plight commoners and nobles of lesser standing must endure, the man said approvingly. With a mere tilt of his head, the Marines moved in and released the handcuffs from his wrists. A show of trust between friends, Wyatt Staples? Thanks. They were starting to hurt, he replied, rubbing his wrists for a few seconds. Now? Why should I trust you? For all I know, you're just trying to use me. Ah, he replied, leaning back and raising a finger. The difference is that I won't hide that fact. You've called too much attention upon yourself, Wyatt Staples. You have no house, no standing, no power, no nothing. You're a commoner, but men like you are rare. Were it not for our efforts, you'd be dead right now in your cell. The prince will not take lightly that you insulted not only that haughty banshee he calls a sister, but his pride too. So you're welcome. Is that not proof enough that we wish to help you? Good point, Wyatt replied, crossing his arms. In that case, thank you. But now that I'm marked for death, what can I do? I don't suppose you'll keep me hidden here forever. Preparations are being made. Don't fret. We may be few, but there are more of us every day. True loyal sons and daughters of the principality ready to strike down the arrogant Astors. The royal regent, Duke Draymore, rewards loyalty, and you, my friend, could be highly rewarded in his service. Wyatt frowned and scoffed. Another royal? I understand why that would seem like a contradiction, the man replied with a bemused chuckle. But unlike the prince and his ilk, Duke Draymore is a true royal. As regent, he can rule the principality while he prepares a suitable heir to be a true prince. Unlike the inept who inherited the throne without gaining it. Do you see? His Lord Regent only seeks the best for our beloved principality, while the current prince only seeks to perpetuate the stagnancy that his house feasts upon. They are nothing but arrogant tyrants, and they must be removed. Pirate attacks have been rampant across several sectors. Drazan raiders have managed to make incursions all the way here, to Jintrax. There are mounting protests and rebel groups spreading like wildfire due to the economic instability. And this prince, he said with disdain, cavorts alongside smugglers and criminals, little better than pirates, just to gain some forces, disgraceful and without honor. I wasn't aware that the problem was so dire or widespread, and I wonder how much of it is even true, Wyatt thought, looking mildly shocked. I mean, I carried the wretch to Woodshaft, but I wasn't aware of those negotiations. Couldn't they, just force them to comply? Why threaten them when you carry with you Royal Marines? He asked with a scoff. Wyatt gasped. Royal Marines? I thought those were regular Marines. The man nodded. I know you're innocent, Wyatt Staples. You couldn't have known their perverse machinations and cutthroat diplomatic tactics. That's how House Astor rules, with veiled displays of power, for they know none would dare stand up against them. And if they do, they unleash their dogs of war and the blue-haired demons. Another burst of fire erupted in his guts upon hearing the brazen insult directed at Cynthia and House Winfield in general. Oh? If you think I'm innocent, then why did you plant that thing in my quarters? He asked, frowning. To be perfectly honest, I was against that idea, he replied, while Wyatt lost his frown and blinked in surprise. We are honest, Wyatt Staples. Yes, we wanted to... Throw them off! Ever since the battle against the Caiston forces, the dogs loyal to the prince have been breathing down our necks rather vigorously. You were an ideal scapegoat at the moment, this we will not deny. Your outburst during that joke of a trial was, to say the least, impressive. We apologize profusely for ever thinking you could be another fool who bent the knee before the ungrateful Asters. I mean, I did bend the knee, he replied. I like my head attached to my body, though it won't be for long after what I said. But screw them. Risking my life for their benefit is not why I signed up. I just wanted a cushy position and a good pay at the end of it, not whatever bullshit they're dealing with. That was a half-truth, but as long as his mysterious interviewer bought it, then he didn't care. A man that knows what he wants is a man that can achieve great things, Wyatt Staples. Your ambitions may be low since you are a commoner, but they are fitting. However, you could achieve so much more if you were to join us, the man said, as if I have a choice. Either I join you or you'll kill me, Wyatt thought, but mentally smirked. How? I'm going to lose my head or spend the rest of my life in prison if I'm lucky after what I said. At any rate, I'm sure that blonde prick knows I'm not in my cell. Do not worry about it, we've covered that. Even that disgraceful prince can be fooled for a certain amount of time, the man replied. Will you join us? I don't know you. What could I gain if I join you? Asked the pilot with interest. The man relaxed his posture, and while he couldn't see it, Wyatt could almost feel the grin spreading across his lips. Prestige, honor, true camaraderie, and a promised bounty for your services 3 times bigger than the current retirement plan the Navy offers to commoners in perpetuity. Not only that, but if you fall in battle, those same rewards will be passed on to your family members and descendants. My son will inherit my riches, even if I were to die? Wyatt asked, all bright-eyed and optimistic. Indeed, your son will be provided, Wyatt Staples, the man replied, and you, my friend, will be eligible to start your noble lineage. The Asters were fools for squandering such a talented man. Wyatt smiled widely, but inside he would have been on the ground if he could laugh. They don't know anything about me. That means my records have either been deleted, their contact is not within the Third Fleet traders, or that really was their only QEC, and they acted in pure desperation. This is too good to be true. How am I to trust you if you don't reveal your face? He asked tentatively. It is a security precaution. If you're captured, our whole group would be put at risk, Wyatt Staples. I'm certain that a man as intelligent as you can understand discretion, the man replied. Fair enough, he replied with a shrug. You must be someone highly valued by Duke Draymore to be given such a difficult mission. I mean, you're right under the prince's oblivious nose, and here we are. Wyatt barked a laugh and clapped his hands together 3 times. Me, if only, the man replied, chuckling. Our Lord Regent would never associate with me. No, I am a mere conduit for our leader aboard this vessel. He witnessed your trial with great admiration and concluded that you could become an asset to our just and true cause. Join us, Wyatt Staples, and fight for the future of the Principality, not the cruel, unworthy Asters that bleed us dry with their incompetence and prohibitions. It's hard to refuse such an offer. All right. You convinced me. I'll join you. What am I to do? Wyatt replied solemnly. Most excellent, the man said, and from a sealed pouch he extracted a cube no more than 5 centimeters wide. This is a Mortax cube. It is nearly undetectable by most security measures, and it can be easily concealed in one's person. Upon activation, it'll emit a strong but short-lived electromagnetic pulse that will fry any non-heavily protected electronic devices within a 10-meter radius. Okay, so what am I supposed to do with it? Throw it at an Aster dog and hope for the best? Wyatt asked, raising an eyebrow at the strange object he'd never seen nor heard from before. This won't kill me, right? Of course not. Elsewise, we would have attempted an attack against the damnable Asters before. We do not lack loyal members with enough conviction to give their lives for the betterment of the Principality, after all, the man replied. All right. That still doesn't explain what am I to achieve, Wyatt insisted, scratching his head a few times in confusion. You shall be escorted back to the conference room where your trial was being held. As we speak, the prince is being convinced and lured into a trap so that he may cast his judgment upon you. You, Wyatt Staples, will be in a unique position. You'll be within reach of the prince without the direct protection of his rabid dogs to protect him. Once he's close to you, you will activate the Mortax cube by activating a disguised, short-ranged detonator, the man said, and presented him with a small badge representing the Royal Navy. Common and inconspicuous. If it's an electromagnetic weapon and isn't enough to kill me, what will it do to the prince? Wyatt asked more seriously. The pulse will take down his shields, leaving him vulnerable. In that moment, his life will end, and you, Wyatt Staples, will forever be remembered as a hero of the Principality were you to die. But in the ensuing commotion, we will do our best to save you, as we proceed to eliminate the Astor wench as well. He explained calmly and leaned forth. Be our hero, Wyatt Staples. Make your son proud. Make Duke Draymore proud. Make us proud. Wyatt smiled, taking the cube and the badge in trembling hands. He stored the cube in his right pocket and put on the badge right above his handkerchief. In that case, for my son, for the Principality, it shall be done, and the Astors will rue the day they dared to throw me away. You will be remembered, Wyatt Staples, the man said, standing up. Before you activate the cube, we will need a signal to be ready. That signal will be House Astor falls today. Understood? Understood, he replied by putting on his best, eager, maniacal face. The man and the other men around him chuckled at his antics, but the leader raised his hands and moved them in a calming gesture. Ease up, Wyatt Staples. You must remain as calm and stoic as possible. Avoid drawing any interest by acting weirdly. Just imagine that you are about to be judged by the prince without a plan in mind. I'll try. But me? A hero of the Principality? Such honor. Even if I die, my son will be safe. Thank you for giving me this chance to settle the score with those unworthy whoresons, he said eagerly. He was perhaps overselling his pitch, but he was a commoner, and that played in his favor to give his act a genuine air of idiot-ready-to-die syndrome. The two Marines that brought him to the secret room handcuffed him again, but without securing the lock, giving him the opening to free his hands at any moment of his choosing. They then escorted him through the same long tour without meeting anyone until they were nearing the room in which the trial was being held. A few crew members who saw him shouted insults at him, and some others spat at him, desiring the worst upon him for insulting Princess Clara to her face. As he entered the room, he saw that the commanders and the admiral were back on their spots. Clara and Cynthia were on the balcony, but the prince was standing near the center of the room with two Royal Marines flanking him. As he arrived at the desk and chair he'd used no less than 2 hours ago, but instead of sitting down, he remained up, defiant. The room was once again filled with various officers from all branches and ranks, most of them silently glaring at him or murmuring about his senseless disrespect. You won't kneel? The prince asked forcefully. I won't. I don't have to, Wyatt replied firmly, unafraid. The prince closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Very well. With a simple hand gesture, the Royal Marines stepped back and lowered their weapons, putting them in a relaxed state. Then he stepped forth, each step echoing across the room with a deafening rumble. He stood in front of Wyatt, half a head taller than the commoner, and glared at him. You've disgraced my family's name. You've insulted my sister's honor. You've disrespected me not once, not twice, but thrice now. I must admit I admire your resolve, Wyatt Staples. He paused for a moment. Such a shame. I thought that you had some promise, but alas, a commoner is a commoner at the end of the day. Due to your actions and the lack of solid evidence, I was going to sentence you to a dishonorable discharge and leave you here. However, your transgressions against royalty shall not be tolerated. Wyatt scoffed. So much for loyalty is its own reward, huh? You Astors only vomit that line when you need something from others but don't give anything back in return, he shrugged. What else is new? So be it, the prince said. Did you find peace during this time? Wyatt nodded. I did. A repugnant snake is before me, this I see now, he said, and the entire room went icy silent, thinking he had insulted the prince to his face. I see, the prince replied. Wyatt Staples, as prince of the Astorian Principality, I find you guilty upon grievous charges of lèse-majesté, incompetence, collusion, sedition, and conspiracy. I sentence you to death. Do you have any last words? I do, Wyatt said, and with a flick of his wrists, the handcuffs fell to the ground. "House Astor falls today!" And before anyone could react, he slammed the badge with an open palm. "House Astor falls today!" A chorus emerged from several members of the audience, suddenly pulling out concealed weapons and firing wildly at the prince. Wyatt was on the ground before the shots were fired, and he looked up with a smile as the shields of the prince remained intact, easily stopping bullets and lasers. There was a moment of confusion, and then the hectic sound of a short-lived battle was heard, alongside a few screams and curses, but by the time he stood up, every assailant was held tightly by those around them. His eyes moved to the commanders, and to his surprise, Juliana Winfield was holding Frederick Anderson's head against the podium while a gun rested in front of him, his eyes blazing with hatred and confusion. "How?" the commander of the infantry division demanded. "Your shields! They should be disabled. You should be dead." The prince sighed. "So it was you, Frederick? What did my uncle promise you, to sell your honor and dignity? You've brought disgrace upon your house with your actions." "I have nothing to say to you, Astor!" Frederick cried out. "His Lord Regent will be victorious. You don't deserve to sit on that throne. You'll bring damnation upon us all." His eyes went wild and moved past the prince to focus on Wyatt. "You! I saw you activate the detonator. I was informed that you joined our cause." "I'm not a stinking traitor like you," Wyatt replied with disgust. "Your son will die for this, Wyatt Staples," Frederick threatened. "I'll be sure to mourn him," Wyatt replied with a cocky grin. "Take him away, Juliana. Interrogate him. I want a full list of every traitor aboard my fleet as soon as possible," the prince ordered, and Juliana obeyed, pushing the man away. "Take the rest away. They shall be judged accordingly." He then turned to Wyatt. "As for you, Lieutenant Staples, congratulations are in order." Wyatt smiled sincerely and looked up at Clara and Cynthia. Cynthia was smiling approvingly, while Clara gave him a dainty smile. Then he turned to the prince. "Loyalty is its own reward, my prince.